Sparks radio program, mega worldwide.
I've had people walk out of me.
Sorry,
I'm only going to put it on if there's an
Okay.
I don't
Hold on, I'm going to bring my voice down a little bit and just try to keep it even.
True progressive talk.
Might be a good time for you guys to give up.
Welcome back, everybody, to the House Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide. We're live on the air at WCPT 820. WCPT820.com is the website, of course, and if you're driving around, program it into your car radio. That's like it's one of the easiest way to customize your car. Johnny Million's still with us, of course, and Philip Ittner is now joining us from Lviv, Ukraine, where he has freshly been adorned with a rather a curiously worrying piece of fashion. In that he was just showing us he has and is out and about. He's got his press treads, but he also, along with them, comes a Kevlar vest, a big emblazoned press logo across his chest, and a Kevlar helmet. Which
I will not put on because it's performative, and I hate when I see reporters do that. So
right.
unless there is a alert, I'm not going to put it on.
Right. I think that's wise. Sometimes you just put it on not to carry it around. As a motorcycle rider, I can attest to this.
That's absolutely true. Actually,
it's a pain. Yes. It's a pain in the butt to carry around. There's no way to carry around a helmet without it banging against your knee or your thumb. So you just put it on and walk around with your visor up. So,
I've worn a bulletproof vest, flak jacket for warmth. I was on the roof of at the siege of the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. I didn't have any proper warm clothes, so I wore it to try and keep warm. They're not very good for that purpose.
No. Well, they're ceramic, so you think they keep you warm like soup in a pot. But also, I wore one when I was in Mexico City at one point. They made me because I was down there for an event and I was being shuffled around, and kidnappings are brutally high there. It's almost like a season. And so they had me, I had an armored detail and like 6 dudes with ridiculously big guns and this chest plate. That was a good afternoon. Now let's start off with what we do know. The Russian state media, which of course is a mouthpiece for the Kremlin, there is no even calling it a news organization. It's basically PR from the MOD over there, the Ministry of Defense, has basically said their new goal is to capture the southern part of all of Ukraine, basically blocking them off from the Black Sea and hooking up with their forces in Moldova, and Moldova's effectively next. The people in Georgia, in the territories that Russia did not claim, are getting more and more nervous by the day because what happens in Ukraine will come to them next. That's their big fear. There's some elements of Chechnya that feel that way as well. And there's a lot of people in Moldova that are starting to sweat. Now, I think they feel way safer even than, than they otherwise would in sort of northwestern Ukraine, for example, because they do have a border and they're separated by it. But they have this breakaway region, which has been a setup for a long time by the Russians for this predicate that was coming. It was always coming.
They've had a military base in a place called Transnistria, which is a breakaway republic in the eastern side of Moldova, which was a former Soviet Union republic. And they've had a base there for a long time, and it's a pretty podunk kind of operation. Right. It's not significant.
Right.
And earlier, about 3 days ago, I want to say, there was an article that was put out in one of the major Russian press agency outlets, Izvestia, in which a Russian general said that they were going to try and link up with Transnistria. And what that would effectively do is cut Ukraine off from the sea. Now, do I think that is real? Do I think that is something we should worry about? No, I do not.
They don't have the ability.
A couple of reasons for that.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there's a little thing called the Ukrainian army.
Right.
which
And the
has
Ukrainian people and territory
and the Ukrainian people and territory, and they have shown that they have a voice and that they have input into whatever designs militarily Russia might have. They can try and link up with Transnistria if they want. If they want to throw their army away that way, they can do it. They will not succeed. In no small part because that will mean that they will have to lay siege to Odessa, because Odessa will be in the soft underbelly of any kind of connection along the southern border or the southern coastline of Ukraine. And Odessa has been preparing for a siege for 2 months now, more than that, but certainly since the 24th, when this new phase of the war kicked off. Odessa is if you want to say Mariupol is a fortress city, which the Ukrainians are making great hay out of, Odessa is, it's a fortress like you wouldn't believe. So they can say what they want, the Russians, but, it's, again, we go back to the old saying. I say, with my experience with the U.S. military, it's every battle plan is good up until first engagement with the enemy. And you like to do Mike Tyson's bit about, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Right.
The Russians can plan what they want, but the Ukrainians are going to have a say. And, given the previous performance of the Russian military on this land, go ahead.
I don't see that happening.
Try and link up with Transnistria. Go ahead.
Use those resources to make that attempt, because I think it was around Donetsk, but they've been trying to push in the eastern part of the country, which they are, ultimately trying to, Mariupol and I think it's Izium, if I'm pronouncing it right. They're basically trying to capture those two places and then slice off a big chunk of the eastern part.
And then slice it off, right. Yeah.
Right. Which
There's
they're not
another quick thing I want to.
Sure.
I want to make another quick point about Odessa, and then and I don't think we really should spend too much more time on Transnistria because it ain't going to happen.
I agree.
But there's another point that I want to make about the southern flank and the coastline around Odessa, and it is this. And this is just my wonky kind of understanding of the, I'm a nerd about this kind of stuff. The river that runs through the middle of Ukraine, which is the Dnipro, as it approaches the Black Sea, it breaks off into a bunch of tributaries and a bunch of small rivulets, really, that flow into the Black Sea. And the water line that comes out of the Dnipro goes into the Black Sea, and it breaks off. And so there's all sorts of little river crossings that they would have to go across to get their armor over to Transnistria. And it would just be a kill zone. It would be an absolute kill zone. So, I
even
see
without
that they have
the new
floated
stuff
that
that's
idea
coming in, by the way.
Right.
That doesn't even count on $1.6 billion in new gear that's coming in.
Yeah. No, that's Russian bluster, and it ain't going to happen.
Right.
But the other thing that I've seen coming out of Russia that I do find really disturbing is this new increased discussion of how the Ukrainians have to learn by force, basically, that they are not an independent land of Slavs, that they are just Russians, and in a very disturbing a television program, which we saw at the beginning of the week. I think it was the beginning of this week. It all blurs together. There was a guy on a very popular television show in Russia saying, we have to eliminate the idea that some Ukrainians have that they are not Russian. And if we cannot eliminate the idea, we have to eliminate the people.
Yep.
Which is terrifying.
Right. The languaging around this, especially considering, like I said, the predicate. We're going to talk about. I don't want to get too far into it, whatever. The denazification mythology that was started in the beginning of this has so jumped the shark, and now this idea that they're basically going to claim the southern part of it and kill the economy so that they can effectively starve those folks, and that the idea is that anybody has the illusion that A, they meant this as any kind of goodwill battle to start with is absurd, but that they're going to stop here. That illusion has to be, put out of mind by so many people who are like, well, there never was a plan to stop on Russia's part. We got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. It's the House Park Radio program, Mega Worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Philip Ittner is with us live from Lviv. Philip Ittner is on Twitter at Philip Ittner, 1L, 2 T's. If you want to ask him a question too, Johnny Million will be watching the chat for those kind of things and keeping track of those. And we'll be back right after this.
Mega Worldwide.
Oh,
So yeah, there was an article in the map is not called "In Putin's War, the Map is Not the Territory" in Foreign Policy that brings up the fact that a lot of the areas even that we're talking about is like, well, Russia has these areas and Ukraine has these areas. That when it's Ukrainian area, the reason why most of these maps only show just like the red areas where the Russians are, and the rest of the country is just assumed to be Ukrainians, is because they have those territories. Even when the Russians make inroads, they usually get driven right back out. The difference in reality about the red areas of the map is that they're not these ubiquitous, like the entire land of it. As a matter of fact, it's quite porous. And there's been some reports of like Ukrainian little like smaller shock teams making it all the way to the Russian border. Now, Russia has accused them of doing stuff, of monkeying around with the, and I guess blowing things up or trying to allegedly getting inside, blowing up a bridge and then getting out. The Ukrainians were able to do that. They were able to get into Russian territory on the other side of this railroad and blow up the bridge going into Ukraine. And they did it in such a strategic way that people were like, Russia said, people were saying it's a false flag, it's a back and forth. But the way they did it was in a way that makes it nearly impossible to fix. They bent the bar, they blew it up. The munitions were placed in such a way that they were well trained you couldn't just lay new track immediately over top of it. You can't just roll them in and lay them over a hole that you can fill in, which is how a false flag version of knocking these things out often looks. The bridge itself was bent and gnarled backwards and in by the explosions, and therefore it takes the whole restructuring of the bridge to fix. So it spoke to this kind of idea.
Do you remember Do you remember the helicopter attack on the fuel depot in Belgorod inside of Russia? Remember how you and I talked about that, and we were like, something stinks about that, and it doesn't smell right. And one of the things we floated was the idea that the Russians had done it on themselves. Right. I actually have learned a little bit about what happened there as days have passed, and it turns out what actually it does. I mean, look, fog of war and all that, we're not going to know the full story for a long, long time. But it looks like there is a possibility that, yes, there was something that was off about it. But what was off about it was the fact that it was Ukrainian guys using call signs and communications information that they had received from downed pilots here. So they had downed Russian pilots. Oh, wow. Okay. Taken them in and said, what are your call signs? What do we need to do if we fly in our own helicopters? How can we fly in and convince your air defenses that we're one of you guys? Right. And because the Russian pilots were like, screw it, we're done with this whole thing. Right. They said, this is what you need to say. Now, is that true, or is this just more rumor and rumint, as they call it? Who knows? But there was something off about that. And I think that's a distinct possibility that the Ukrainians, because they have a common language, because they have, in many ways, common training, although they have been NATO trained for 8 years, and that is paying off dividends because they now have an NCO class, that I think it's entirely possible that the Ukrainians were able to pull that off themselves because of that sneaky-deaky kind of tricky thing of like, we know your call signs. But yeah, the Ukrainians are, I mean, the ability of this military is just astounding. It's just, I mean, my goodness.
Again, you've got the Biden administration sending in $500 million worth of gear that's effectively arriving, or has been arriving for the last 3 days on the eastern side of the country, by Ukrainians going into Poland, picking it up and driving it in, or going in and just our pilots get out of the plane. The Ukrainian pilots get in the plane and fly this nondescript, semi-private cargo plane owned by next to no one.
Yeah. Well, and also we're taking Ukrainian artillery officers, bringing them over to Poland, and giving them a crash course in the howitzers that we're giving them. I think it's 155 millimeter howitzers we're giving them, and the Ukrainians are so determined to make this work that they're picking it up. Well,
and also the French have just announced that they're giving them these mobile howitzers that they have. That if many people have seen, if you've ever seen, I don't try to use as easy a pop culture reference as you can, but if you've ever seen Under Siege, there is a scene where the people are trapped on the boats. It's the Seagal movie, ironically enough.
I was about to say, is that the Seagal movie on a boat?
Yes,
where he's
he's got Andrew Davis directed it. He's a Chicago boy. We love him. He in it, and he used some Chicago cops as the officers on that. So everybody on this ship talks like that. It's fantastic. Hey, listen. So, but they at one point deal with the fact that the ship has been decommissioned except for the nukes and blah blah. That's the plot. But they have starbursts, these big munitions that they can use to target and then fire. And it shows them shoving these wadding things in, because they have to do it by hand, because the way these things are done. Okay, that's how most of the howitzers operate. There's a dude there. It takes some time to learn how to do this. The French have a truck that drives up, and the howitzer gun comes up on it. It's the exact same kind they mount on boats, anchors into the ground with these plates that tip the thing forward, and then it's got two little arms, one that puts the basically the artillery shell in, and then another that puts the wadding in behind it, and then it fires and it does it. And they can do 3 in under 60 seconds, or they can fire continuously over this time because the guns heat up and blah blah blah. Anyways, France is sending in something like 23 of those things, and between that is effectively the war on the Eastern Front, because the Russians have no way to move their stuff fast enough to not get hit by this stuff. It's crazy.
If we can, if the Ukrainians and the Western powers and the NATO equipment that's coming in here, I say we because I feel great solidarity with the Ukrainians. So forgive me when I do that by mistake. I'm not part of the Ukrainian military. I just feel solidarity.
Did you see the title of the show today? It's starting to feel like we Ukraine. You know what I mean?
If the Ukrainians can outrange the Russian artillery, it will be a game changer, because that's what most of the damage, when they are demolishing entire city blocks in Mariupol or Kharkiv, places like that, they're doing it because they outrange the Ukrainians with their artillery. If we can marginalize that advantage that the Russians have, it will change the entire face of this war.
Right.
And also,
and the problem is it has to. Here's the thing too. This is the point where we are beyond sort of there's still some lingering feeling in the West in some quarters that this is basically Crimea, Donbass 2.0, and that it's a chip across, and that they were, this is just, bound to happen, and Russia and Ukraine have these problems, and this is a border dispute between two countries, to the point where the Russians, including Putin, have basically changed the whole dialogue this week to, by the way, Moldova, Lithuania, Latvia, all these countries, knock it off. You're ours. Get used to the idea, and you're next.
Yeah.
And that anybody who even questions that you should be absorbed back into Russia as the structure of the Soviet Union, but with a different hierarchical lead at the top, needs to be wiped from the face of the earth. Now, and it's amazing to me that all the anti-U.S. imperialism left that we have in this country, that has, at times genuinely
I don't even want to say a name, but
genuinely legitimate issues with how U.S. policy has been handled in the past, is somehow just giving a wash to this and going, well, but I mean, of course, they're animals. Like, the people getting killed and the people who are killing them. I mean, are they really human? It's gross. So I wanted to bring up real quick because we got like 3 minutes into this part, and then I want to get some questions from. Oh my gosh, that was a cat. It scared me. I thought that was me.
Dude,
Yeah, I got some
Johnny.
cat issues happening.
That's Johnny Million's cat was just being a business end of a wire, I think. So
Pretty much.
So I went into, we talked about this before, and we don't even have to discuss this part, but I went and did some, back listening to some of the folks that were sort of semi cheerleading this thing leading up to it, and were pacifying people being against it for about 10 days into it. And now we're kind of just like either hanging on for dear life to this BS or just stopped talking about it and moved on to other issues, hoping nobody notices. Do you know that the excuse they often use is, well, America does things like, we're giving weapons to the Yemen government, and they're using these weapons in Yemen, and the Saudis against the Houthis, for example. The Houthis last week, or maybe 12 days ago, had a Nazi rally and a Nazi ceremony where they literally all gave the Hitler salute in the Houthi-held territories of Yemen. Like, and not like in 2014, not, because there was a guy in a thing that one point and 10 people in a group, blah, blah. They all lined up and gave the Nazi salute in the streets. In Syria and Damascus under Assad right now, you can buy Hitler stamps. I don't want to talk, and if you said, well, that's predicate, the United States can go into Syria, go into Yemen, strafe bomb the place, we can pull in people, ISIS fighters that we captured and turn them loose in the country because these people deserve it. The way Russia is doing with Chechen fighters, for example. It's an absurdity. It's grotesque. You would never say that's okay. Yeah. So why would it be okay in this situation?
Why is it okay when Russia does it? Yeah, right. There are two things I want to mention at this point. And do you remember a couple of weeks ago I said that I was going to start working on what I called my magnum opus?
Yes, hold that. That's a tease. Wait, because we're at the hard break at the half. So hold that thought. Okay. We'll come back right after this. It's Hal Sparks on the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide. Infotainmentwars.com. Like and subscribe. Give a thumbs up to the show on our YouTube channel. It really helps us out. Also, if you're a troll, give us a thumbs down and write something, mean-spirited and sad, because that helps us too. The algorithm doesn't care. The great robot overlords of the internet don't care if you like me, just as long as I'm engaging. We'll be back. Welcome back to the show. So, magnum opus. Philip Ittner, you were mentioning it.
So about 3 weeks ago, I decided that I was going to try and tackle some of these arguments that the Russians have been putting out about, in particular, Nazis and fascism in Ukraine, because that seems to be their excuse for what they're doing. And I wanted to address it because it's not, there's a germ of truth to it, but there's a massive propaganda campaign surrounding it. And the reason why it has taken me so long is because the narrative of this country has been purposefully, willfully manipulated for decades.
Right.
And so I had to sift through it, figure out how I was going to approach it. And I am about this close to putting it out. I may even be able to put it out tomorrow. But the narrative that this place is filled with Nazis. And so that was another thing that I heard Flynn say.
Right.
Flynn on OAN, when he saw Malcolm Nance joining the Legion, and he said, so what is he fighting for a fascist state? And it's like, man. Yeah. And then when I saw Bimini Bohr talking about all this about fascists in Ukraine, and I was like, dude, a ticket to Warsaw from LA is probably $1,200 in your $1.1 million home. A flight to Warsaw is maybe $1,200, and then you can cross the border and come here if you want for another $500. And then once you're here, the cost of living is really cheap. Right. Why don't you get up off your cynical posterior and come over here and talk to the Ukrainians before you decide that you're going to suck up to a Russian narrative about how everybody is a Nazi here. Right. It's just, it has to be it has to be debunked, and I've been working very hard. And the reason why I couldn't just do it off the cuff is
Right.
because I know what's going to happen is that a lot of people are going to push back on it because they're dedicated to this idea of this place being not full of Nazis, because then that allows the Russians to do what they do.
Right.
So I had to be very precise about it, and I did it as far. Look, people do doctorates about this kind of stuff.
Sure.
So I've tried to pound all this out in 3 weeks, and I'm this close to putting it out. People who are following me on YouTube should look forward to that. It's going to come out. It's going to be longer than my normal vlogs, but I hope to touch on all the points and dispel.
It's called a micro documentary, and it's a well-known strategic way of doing information on YouTube, and you should be proud of it.
And I'm still going to get it in the neck.
Well, yes. This is interesting to me too, because you can predicate. There are enough bad people in almost any country to use a similar predicate to allow almost anyone to destroy every innocent person in that country if this is the standard. And it cannot be, if you care about human life at all. Anyways, period. End of story. From the Mike Flynn's of the world, who allegedly are pro-life. We got to save the babies from being turned into adrenochrome farms, like Mike Flynn. Or if you're allegedly left-leaning, where you're like, human life, nobody should be bombing anywhere. Well, then that's everywhere. And if that means bombing your own territory, that's certainly categorically different than someone else bombing your territory. That's just the end of it, because it's your people. If you want to make a case that, like Pol Pot or something, you kill your own people, these are handled differently by the world. And it is, it's interesting, because that's been the conversation about, like, how dare we, or why do we interact here and we don't interact in other countries? Whereas, in some examples are countries with an ongoing civil war. Others are, territorial disputes where no one has agreed on borders for more than 2 years, forever.
Yeah. Well, and I make the point in this thing that I'm about to put out about how, the Ukrainians have never been able to tell their own story, because they've always been subjected to another power that has made that narrative for them, most notably the Russians. Above all else, it's been the Russians.
Right.
The Germans, the Austro-Hungarians, the Polish, sure. But lots of people have told the story of this place for their own purposes. But for the first time, except for a couple of windows in their history, they're going to be able to tell their own history, warts and all. And that's the thing about the Ukrainians that I admire so much.
Yeah.
I was filming for the better part of an hour and a half at a monument to Stepan Bandera, who was a very, very bad guy. He was first and foremost a Ukrainian nationalist, but he was also a pretty violent, vile person.
Right.
And not one police officer came up to me and said, "What are you doing? Why are you filming here?" If I was in Moscow, if I was in St. Petersburg, forget about it.
Right.
I'd be snatched up like that. So
there's an argument that if you were filming, around the statue of Robert E. Lee when it was still up here in the States, that individuals would have come up to you and went, "What are you filming? What are you doing?" Because they believed it should stay up.
Mainstream media.
Right. And by the way, we had, and again, this is how it should work. We in the United States had Confederate leaders, statues to them, up in major cities in the South, and they have started coming down, as they should, because you shouldn't be able to leave a chess piece on the board after you've lost the game. It's at the very least. Secondly, these are not people to be revered. Oftentimes, the people
if you
who
wore
revered,
the gray, you go away.
Right, and if many of the people who revered them, their relatives who fought in this war died or were injured or lost all their political standing for decades because of that dude. So beyond that fact, but we, as a public, had a back and forth about it in the arms of our democracy. And they came down. And there's still going to be people arguing about it. And Ukraine, I have no doubt, would have gone through that process, because they'd only recently, in 2014, shed what was effectively the last vestiges of Russian control of the old Soviet control that had been dogging them for years. In Yanukovych, effectively, is the last gasp of that.
Yeah. And look, the Ukrainians, when they write their history, unlike the Russians, who like to just, and occasionally us as well, I mean, this is why critical race theory scares the bejesus out of so many people,
Right.
is that, you know, when you write a history that isn't just glowingly, positive about your own country, a lot of people get nervous and they get uneasy. And what I love about this country is that they have actually said, they are openly saying, when we write our history, when we become fully independent, when we write our history, we will do it warts and all. We will address this damage and this trauma that, by the way, is generational.
Yeah.
Okay, the trauma that has happened in this country. And I was with a very dear friend of mine, a Ukrainian friend of mine, who is she was a tour guide, and she's now my fixer. And we were in a car for about 2 hours when I went out and did that thing at the salt mine. Do you remember that vlog
Yes.
I did? When we were driving back, we had a long conversation, and she said, I am a Ukrainian patriot. I'm a Ukrainian nationalist. I believe in the idea of an independent Ukraine. But I also believe that we have to purge ourselves of the trauma and the damage that happened generations ago, that have been passed on down through the generations.
Right.
And that is a constructive approach to,
and it's
your
not
own
mutually
history,
exclusive. There's an illusion that kind of thing is mutually exclusive, and it's usually put forth by the people who want to hold on to that generational guilt because they don't think it's guilt in some cases, or that they're too, they're not psychologically developed enough to deal with it. And that's that's effectively what we have with those fights, like you brought up with CRT, in states like Florida and the like. There are, and there are other folks like throughout Russia, and like you said, you couldn't film a statue like you did in Ukraine in Russia without somebody bugging you about it, because quite frankly, the Russians know they use people's warts and all look at their own country, the freedom to criticize your own government, as a weapon.
Yeah, they do it. Look, I don't want to give everything away from this vlog I'm about to put out.
No, don't.
I will tease a little bit. I will tease a little bit more of it in saying that there are places around this town that commemorate some really ugly chapters in their own history. And they're not shying away from it. They're airing their dirty laundry in the hope that it will be, cleansed in the sunlight. So, that is completely unlike what Russia would like. And Russia, when they bang on about Bandera and the far right in Ukraine, they don't really care about the far right or Bandera or any of it. They don't care at all because, all they have to do is look in the mirror. What they're doing is using it because they know that the world and the West, that there are elements within the West, in particular in America, who will go, hey, that's right, they are full of Nazis. The Russians don't care about that. Nope. They may elicit it because of the great myth of the patriotic war, the Great Patriotic War in the Second World War, and so they sell it to their own population by saying, we never finished the war, we need to finish the fascist remnants that were left alive in Ukraine, and that's why we need to go back in. Or they sell it internationally so that there's division within the West, but they don't really care about it. They do not. It's just a tool.
That's right.
It's a device they use.
We got to take a break, and we'll come back with questions for Philip in our final segment of the show today. It's the House Park Radio program, Mega Worldwide. We'll be back.
Now the question is,
will we have the happy ending song? Yes. Hey, Chicago, can you play the happy ending song for us when we come back?
You got it.
You know how that makes me happy.
All right.
You are happy, let us be happy together, whether the weather is cloudy or sunny. I will always be your funny honey bunny. I am lucky, you are lucky, let us get lucky together, whether the weather is cloudy or breezy. I'll be there to say, hey, come on, let's take it easy. 'Cause isn't it nice to have the friends that you do? And isn't it nice that the sky is so blue? And isn't it nice to say I love you, chugga chugga choo choo, woo woo. I am smiling, you are smiling, let us smile together, whether the weather is cloudy or stormy. I will still be there in the morning, I'll be right by your side in the morning. I'll make you breakfast in the morning, I hope that you like cereal.
Yeah,
Yay!
see, that was when she actually
Oh, and
performed
by
it
the
live.
way-
Yes, that's Kate
Yeah,
Micucci,
by
by
the
the way,
way,
from Garfunkel and Oates.
she
They did that
starred
live
in
at studio. Yes, she is. They're great people.
Yeah,
Very funny.
and I need that happy message because I am surrounded by some. Well, I'm not at the front. I am still surrounded by some very, very dark stuff here.
Yes.
But I also, on a lighter note, and to follow up with the happiness stuff, and there goes my sign for "Don't worry, support Ukraine." Happy Easter, by the way. It is
Yes,
Orthodox. It is Orthodox Christian Easter here.
Right.
They celebrate Easter about 10 days after we do, about a week after we do in the West, in the Protestant and Catholic world. And the Orthodox Church has a different calendar, so they're celebrating Easter tomorrow. And so there are lots of people out in their finery and flowers and a lot of beauty. So
and that's because, by the way, for people that don't know, that is because the head bishop has to lay all the eggs himself. And because
well, he's
soon?
part bunny.
Right.
He's part
he is.
bunny. So you know,
aren't we all? All right. Johnny Million has some questions for you. Also, I want to mention before he
questions.
gets to them is that a couple of people in the chat have just said they just subscribed to your vlog. I just posted it in the chat room here at infotainmentwars.com and flank.com. You can. If you're in the chat room, that link is in there. I will do it again in a minute if it went by too fast because we have so many people. But that's the happy ending is a bunch of people are subscribing. There you go.
Good.
Go, Johnny.
I hope to do you right
questions
with my magnum.
So be sure to pace yourself with the answers, Phil. We got 5 questions. Ed's 3D Tech asks, how many Russian generals are left in the battlefield?
I mean, they're still there.
I don't know is an acceptable answer.
8 fewer.
Yeah, exactly. But also, as long as we're talking about Russian generals, I don't know if anybody, Hal or Johnny, if you saw the meeting between Putin and the head of the Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu.
Yeah.
Very, very weird
Yes.
meeting. Not only because of what Putin was doing, grabbing onto the desk desperately. I think there's something really seriously wrong with him medically.
Physically, yeah. Right.
Yeah, physically, but also him saying, I don't want you to assault the steel plant, the only remaining part of Mariupol that's left, where the Azov Brigade, which are not fascists, and they've been broomed out.
Those people,
yeah. The Azov steel, no connection, just happens to be because it's on the Azov Sea.
Right.
Putin said, I don't want you to assault it, but I want you to lock it down so that not even a fly can get out. Well, it's a clear enough indication that things are not going the way they want them to go. So, or
that their missiles won't do what they want them to do.
His generals are a mess, and so are the oligarchs. They're all look. Anybody who knows what the inside deal with the Kremlin, they are suddenly disappearing.
Yeah. Like in Spain, one of them murdered his family and then hung himself.
Petersburg,
right, and then in Moscow, another guy murdered his family and killed himself.
We've seen generals being taken off the battlefield by Chechens, and they just never see them again. Sort of thing.
Yeah. So next,
it's the Russian way of doing things.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Next question, Brenda Triplet asks, and this is a good segue. If you think that they'll use a Moab on the steel plant in Mariupol. It sounds like you don't think so.
I don't think so. I mean, they might, but the thing with the steel plant is that it was built by the Soviets, and it's actually also built to resist attacks.
Right.
It was built by the Soviets to be a defensive point. So it's almost a city, an underground city beneath that thing.
Mm-hmm.
But look, I mean, we've seen the Azov commanders come out and say, this is it. We don't expect to last another day. And then they do. And then, and then they come out and say, that things are really bad. And they are really bad there. It's a horrific situation in Mariupol.
Yeah.
But clearly the Russians have gotten to a point, Putin giving that direct order to Shoigu to say, don't assault it, indicates that they don't have the means. They can't do it.
Right. Somebody was pointing out they don't have a Moab like we do, but they have.
They do have a Moab. They have a version of a Moab.
Yeah, they have cluster bombs that are enormous.
Pathetic, in typical pathetic Russian fashion, they have decided to call their largest conventional weapon the father of all bombs. So they have a FOAB.
There's a FOAB.
It's pathetic.
Oh, it's adorable.
It's pathetic because they always look through a prism of where they think they're attacking the West, but what they're really doing is just comparing themselves to the West. And so they couldn't have a MOAB, but they wanted to build a FOAB.
Carl in our chat says he thinks that Russians might want to retain the plant for their own use. That's partly true, but it may or may not be the factory parts of it, just the fact that they want that base once it happens for military use. And if they
because there's not much left. I don't mean to laugh. I didn't. That's a dark, cynical, gallows humor laugh. Because there's nothing left in Mariupol except for that steel plant.
Right. Exactly.
Everything else.
Yeah. Exactly. And they figure they can just starve them out, and it's a siege. And they like the idea of them doing that. Also, my theory is, for the record, that Putin is not holding on to the end of that desk because he is ill or because he has Parkinson's or he's on Pervitin, as many like myself has suggested. I think there was a small button right there that was going to that could launch Sergei into a pool of sharks with laser beams if he gave him any bad news.
I'm badly burnt, but I'm still alive.
You know, my legs are broken. They're starting to smell like almonds. Yeah. So I think he was going to, that's why Sergei was more nervous than he was, because he was like, I'm going to push it. I'm going to push it. Okay. Yeah. There you go. What's
Putin
another
does
question?
Give off very serious Bond villain vibes, doesn't he?
He totally does. If only he had a scar across his whole eye, right?
Yeah. Yeah, or
Johnny
I've got a question from
Yeah.
Kevin Thompson that
Okay.
he thought that they'd heard that the Ukraine forces blew up a bridge to stop the advancement into the western portion.
Into the western portion. That is entirely possible. I think the bridge, and I'm not the only one who has been discussing this. There are those of us who are watching this, and I don't want to go into great detail about where I'm getting this information from, but there's been discussions of them trying to blow up the Kerch Bridge and the potential that they do that, because if they blow up something to watch for all your audience out there and for the various sparklers out there. If you see the Ukrainians blowing up the Kerch Bridge, it means they're going to try and take Crimea back, the Ukrainians.
Yeah, because they're gonna isolate so they can't get reinforcements.
They can't get reinforcements, right? And if you see that bridge go up, it means the Ukrainians have so much wind up them that they think they're going to take back Crimea.
Also, and taking out the battleships in that area would be a good precursor about a week and a half before you would try such a thing. Just saying for the record. Also, the real quick, the research facility, the military research facility that caught fire in Moscow, and the chemical plant north of the city that makes the fuel for that particular rocket system they were counting on, which might have been, there's your MOAB right now. It's not going to work. And they just threw a grenade in the guy's face and blew the whole building up. But in Moscow, they had, it's as if a huge defense contractor blocks from the Pentagon burst into flames the day, Trump orders an attack on something. Like, think about it in those terms. It would be all over the news, and it would be madness, and obviously something hinky is going on. How was the reaction? Because I know people had to have reacted to that and to the chemical plant there, because for crying out loud.
Well, I mean, the general consensus within Ukraine is that Russia is imploding. Their sense of things here are that as difficult as it's going to be for us after this war, because we're going to have to do a lot of work, not only in terms of rebuilding what has been destroyed, but also actually do the hard work of building a country. But they and again, we talked about the trauma that they're going to address here. But I have heard many Ukrainians talking about Russia in the sense of like they are this close to falling apart, and when they do, they're going to have it so much harder than we do because they're going to have to address some stuff that they have done not only in this war, but just
the social structure of the entire country is going to collapse. If Russia has, if the leadership gets toppled over there, you're talking about a failed state for a period of time that is even less controlled than what happened in 1990, 1991. Everybody's running for the doors, and everybody on the outside who was like, I'm going to fly back in and steal some stuff. that it's going to be, and the social cohesion aspect of it is going to fall apart because they're going to be at each other's throats because people who didn't support the war, people who did support the war are going to be at each other because how dare you support this monstrous activity, and we only lost because you didn't support it. And I mean, it's not good. That's a terrible situation for your country to be in.
Yeah.
I think we have we only have a minute
We
left.
have one or two more? Okay, one quick question.
Do it.
So
We can do that.
here's one that kind of goes along those same lines from Andrea Brower. After all this war is done and we know Ukraine will prevail, do you think that the Ukraine will then ask to be in NATO, and will NATO accept them?
The potential's there. They'll definitely be part of the EU.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there might be some time, but I would call that as well. We're at the end of the show. Thank you guys for joining us. If you want to stick around for a couple of minutes afterwards at infotainmentwars.com, we'll have a couple more questions in there with Philip, and then but everybody in Chicago, thank you guys for joining us today. Don't forget, we're here every Saturday. The House Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide. Like and subscribe on infotainmentwars.com. Become a Patreon supporter to support the show. Patreon.com/HalSparks. It's the best way to keep us on the air. Cheers.
The taste of